It's a question about what does it mean to orient oneself towards the future, and is the future worth investing in? In other words, what sort of relationship can we collectively have towards the future, not just as an individual, but as a species? This is a very simple question. The question is, what should we do with time? We know time will do something with us, regardless of what we do or don't do. So should we try to do something with it or to it? This is also to ask what we should do about the future. Should we abandon the future and the preeminent value afforded to the future in, the so-called the modernist project?
This fissure of being, or this injection of negation into being, is necessary in order to account for thinking's relationship to being, or how it's possible to think that which is. In other words, you need to think that which is not in order to think that which is.
If we think of the present as what is, its positive consistency is driven by two negations, both of which are internal to it. The present that is not yet, and the present that it has been. So the consistency of the actual present is punctured by both these absent presences, on which it turns out to be dependent. So the problem of conceptualizing time is that of trying to give form to formlessness as such. Of course, formlessness as such is a paradoxical notion. And this is why every attempt to formalize time is paradoxical. And it's also why time is a phenomenon that resists conceptual representation, or conceptualization, if one equates conceptualization with representation. Does this then mean it can only be grasped as pure presentation? Here it's important to mark the difference between the Kantian claim that time as form of intuition is a necessary condition for the representability or cognizability of objects, and the claim that time is intuitive formlessness. The claim that formlessness as such can be directly intuitive is the temptation proper to any philosophy that thinks it can circumvent representation by retrieving the immediacy of time's self-presentation in terms of so-called lived experience.
The cardinal epistemic virtue of enlightenment consists in recognizing the disequilibrium which time introduces into knowing. Knowing takes time, but time impregnates knowing. And enlightenment in this sense, and the rationalist legacy of the Enlightenment, affirms the disequilibrium of time, this cognitive appropriation of disequilibrium, which springs time out of joint, restructures the linear succession of past, present, and future.
In terms of this distinction between, the intentional or the intentional aspects of the mind and the experiential or phenomenal, or however you want to characterize them, the question is how you articulate them. I think there's some philosophers traditionally take consciousness, by which they mean phenomenal consciousness or experiential consciousness, to be primary, and they claim that the intentional aspects of the mind, or sapience, depend upon consciousness. You explain the mental, the psychological, in terms of the experiential. You need to be conscious in order to be able to think about anything. Other philosophers think that no, you have to be able to, you explain intentionality, okay, because you can make kind of headway with intentionality because it's conceptually tractable. Whereas consciousness itself is very difficult to decompose in terms of conceptual analysis, because often the claim is that, this claim keeps re-emerging, the claim that we know it because we have it. So, and there's Ned Block, an American philosopher, once said, if I need to tell you what consciousness is, you don't have it, or you don't understand, you're missing it, which is amusing but not very helpful. So I think that's a fundamental schism in contemporary philosophy. Either consciousness first or intentionality first.
One of the interesting issues, I think, in Berg's Bergson is, and in fact it's taken up again in Deleuze's kind of critique, kind of objections to kind of what he takes to be dialectic and different interpretation, when he says that you can never, concepts alone, the dialectic and the dialectical relations between concepts will never engender a real movement. They'll only kind of, it's the illusion of movement, the illusion of differentiation, of dynamism masquerading as the thing itself. And Bergson insists in Introduction to Metaphysics over and over again that you can never go from concepts to the real. You can never reconstruct the dynamism and the integral nature of real dynamisms from purely kind of conceptual constructions. So this disequilibrium is what Hegel called, to affirm this disequilibrium is to do what Hegel called tarrying with the negative, which, as Zizek helpfully points out, is the virtue that Hegel accords to the understanding, the faculty of opposition, rather than reason, the faculty of conciliation. In other words, it's the understanding the understanding which is the faculty of judgment, which dismembers, objectifies, and discriminates. And the point is that this is indispensable to cognition. Before you can presume to overcome an opposition, you have to be capable of articulating it.
If you consider a philosopher like Heidegger, the great critic of Cartesianism, and the great, always, kind of railing against representation, etc. His whole, when he's in his most famous book, Being in Time, he defines, Dasein as that being which is in each case mine. But he gives no definition of mineness, propriety, own. What does it mean to be, so he doesn't want to have any kind of Cartesian interiority or subjectivity, but he still thinks that we have a kind of a bizarre proprietary relationship to our own experiences, such that the way in which we relate to phenomena as embodied beings is different from the way in which we relate, the way in which we understand anything else in the universe.
Where Kantian transcendentalism cultivated suspicion of unmediated access to phenomena, transcendental phenomenology countered with the revelation that the mediation is immediate, unmediated. That which is accessed is mediated, but the access as such is not. The structure of temporal transcendence seems to harbor some sort of intrinsic, originary differentiation between a subjective and an objective pole, yet this differentiation proves inordinately difficult to configure on the basis of Heidegger's own phenomenological premises, without relapsing into the very distinctions between transcendence and the transcendent, or noesis and noema, which Heidegger claimed to have overcome. This is a quote from Bergson's Trinity of Evolution. It's actually on the first page of the opening of the text. It says, "The existence of which we are most assured, and which we know best, is unquestionably our own. For of every other object we have notions which may be considered external and superficial, whereas of ourselves our perception is internal and profound." It's a mistake to assume that there's a categorical difference in the way in which we know about ourselves and the way in which we know about external objects and phenomena. The claim that experience is a conceptual achievement does not mean that all experience is conceptual. So in other words, this is a kind of a fallacy. If you claim that some minimum degree of conceptualization is required in order to have an experience, that doesn't mean that the character, the intrinsic character of your experience is conceptual.
So, would you like to respond?
The question is, what is the standard of independence being invoked here? If you say that there's, I don't think objectivity, to take this, the notion that is often attacked in these skeptical accounts, it's not, if you have this, I don't think you need to have absolute objectivity to have objectivity. I think you can have, and the fact that anything you say about an aspect of the world is going to be, again, conditioned or limited by all the kind of the factors that we've already mentioned. I don't see in what way that undermines the notions of objective truth. Because unless you say, well, it's all or nothing, either you're absolutely right, either you're capturing some absolute, context-independent or perspective, non-perspectival feature of reality, or you're not getting anything at all. And I think this assumes that the world is like a giant object, like this big thing that's out there, okay, and that we're somehow, incapable of, of reaching. And I don't quite understand how that view works. I think the world is, quite possibly infinitely complex, and maybe there's there's an infinity of truths about the world. Okay, the fact that and if there is, that would mean that there is no all-encompassing, there's no truth of all truths. Okay, which is why I don't accept that the telos of the pursuit of knowledge is a theory of everything, because I don't think there is such a thing as everything. So I don't think that the telos of knowledge, what propels knowledge forward, is trying to kind of circumscribe everything that is. But I think, by the same time, we can always know more. As soon as you know, you're almost certainly kind of going to revise your knowledge in terms of...
Isn't the puzzle in that case how that's possible? If you accept that it isn't possible to have some ultimate picture, but on the other hand, we can refine our specific perspectival versions, isn't the puzzle then for you, well, how? How is... If we can't get to this overall God's eye view, then why is it that we are able to improve those perspectival views, and why don't they arrive? So the reason I'm a critic of realism is not somehow I think it's wrong, because in a sense I can't appeal to right and wrong in that way, but I think it's dangerous, and we should, and a fantasy, and I'd like to point it. I just want to encourage people to hold it like that. Be careful of this realism.
Do either of you want to respond to possible
I would say
charges
be
of
careful of
intrinsic
the
danger?
opposite.
Do you want to
That's
maintain...
what allowed us to.
I have a question for Hilary. Do you think, so Aristotle's beliefs about the sun, say, are radically different from ours? Okay, so do you think that Aristotle was talking about something other than the sun we talk about when he talked about the sun?
Yes. I think that the Aristotelian framework was very powerful in being able to describe the heavens, and it was able to predict very precisely the positions of the planets, and was immensely effective.
Except he didn't believe there were planets.
No.
He didn't believe that the sun. He thought the sun was this kind of giant. Everything he believed about the world was radically different from everything we believe about the world.
Indeed.
So,
but he was able to predict the positions of what we call planets.
well, how are you able to...
And he was able to do that, even though, and this will be a challenge to me, well, how do you think they were able to do it? At the time of Galileo, they could predict the positions of what we call planets for the next few centuries with Aristotle, with their Aristotelian framework. So yes, I think the Aristotelian framework was a way of holding the world. It enabled them to predict all sorts of things. They didn't call them planets, and they didn't call them galaxies, and all of those sorts of things. But our versions of planets and galaxies are also metaphors for way of holding that stuff. And they have some advantages in some areas, and in many ways the Copernican framework has proved to be a more powerful one, and one which we can do more with. But I don't think it's somehow understood the character of the universe. We don't need that bit of it understanding the character of the universe.
But I don't see how they can be different from, according to the logic of your account, it's not as if Aristotle and contemporary science have a different perspective on the same world. They're completely different worlds. And indeed, how can you even compare them as worlds? What criterion of worldhood are you going to use to compare them?
And I agree with the point that you made before, that through language we socialize our closures.
Okay, but then...
So we have an agreed framework which we share from closures that have been made in the past, and then within those closures we modify them, which is indeed why, in large part, it feels to us there's a reality out there, because from the moment that we are born, if we use words in the wrong way, then we are corrected. No, this is what the word bus means. It doesn't mean a car.
How can you recognize a language? By what criterion would you recognize someone as using a language or a word? You can't suddenly say, well, everyone speaks it. There are all these different languages, which are, what is a language? You wouldn't even be able to recognize someone as a language user, according to this account.
Okay, we're going to have... It's getting quite dangerous on the panel, in fact, though, if you're not reading
It's a question for Ray. I was very interested in your presentation, and especially the conclusion you gave when you answered the question of Quentin Millessou. You said that you are looking for the truth of the negative, and that the outcome of that would be the finding a layer of experience which is pre-conceptual or formal. And you know perhaps that there is a whole tradition of thought in India that is called Madhyamaka Prasankika, very precisely, namely the middle way. Madhyamaka and Prasankika means precisely refutation, negation. And the aim, apparently, of this exercise of negation of thesis, of views, is to free the mind from all these, conceptual projections and finding a layer of preconceptual experience, or at least allowing people to be free in order to get and to reach this layer of preconceptual experience. Do you relate what you call your nihilism and this kind of technique of systematic refutation of views for the sake of finding the layer of preconceptual experience?
I'm sorry. It's actually, I think I didn't make myself clear enough. It's actually, I don't believe there is any layer of preconceptual experience. That's the whole... In fact, the point is to say there is not to try to kind of recover this originary domain or stratum of preconceptual experience and to protect it from conceptualization. I want conceptualization. I want more conceptualization. So, and it's in a way,
Yes, but you did say that there is something non-conceptual in the very schematization or categorization of the world. So it's not a layer that we should recover.
Except that Sellers's whole point is that you create a concept of the non-conceptual. That's what a sense impression is. He's saying there are non-conceptual representings, but they can be conceptualized, and the task is to conceptualize them so as to integrate the non-conceptual conditions of conceptualization. This is his Hegelian, his kind of quasi-Hegelian strand. So, but I mean, I take the reference very positively, and I think those, I'm sympathetic to this account of these practices of negation. But I think they're not sufficient. They're one-sided. Once you've negated, and this is, I think, the great lesson of Hegel, you can't have an abstract negation. Negation there must be a negation of the negation. And I think that, determinate negation in Hegel is also has been caricatured, and I think it's something I want to to reaffirm.
And if you hold the world according to the way that Michaela is describing, a sort of realist notion, it's useful in some areas, I think. It's been very powerful post-Enlightenment. It was a very powerful motivation for all sorts of activity. But actually, I think it's rather dangerous. I think it encourages people to think, people who think they're right are in general, I think, rather dangerous folk. And I think seeing that you might hold the world in different ways, that there might be better ways of holding it, that there might be alternatives, and that you might have an understanding of how you might improve on them, is a perspective I feel more comfortable with. I'm not going to say to you now that it would be ludicrous to say the version I have, the story of closure, the theory of closure, is the truth, that would indeed be self-referentially nonsense. But I would say I think it's very helpful. I think it's helpful in understanding how science works. I think it's helpful in building new models. I think it explains how it is that people have so many different perspectives around the world and why they do, and why they come to blows over it.
Yes, all I want to say is that I think it's a mistake. The imputation that, let's say, realism or the ideal of truth and objectivity is totalitarian, oppressive, and leads to kind of dangerous political, pathologies, is completely unfounded. I mean, I think this is part of this kind of a relativist rhetoric which attributes, the crimes of the 20th century to the Enlightenment. And I think that this is, it's actually, the ideal of truth teaches you modesty, okay? It's a complete kind of, I think it's an indefensible slander to say that anyone who believes in truth and objectivity is just waiting to kind of, to shovel people into gas ovens. I think this is really a tiresome cliche of a lot of 20th century philosophy. On the contrary, if once you're bound by the ideal of truth, you know that everything, you have to be prepared to revise everything you believe, because you're always going to be held accountable to some kind of, you're held accountable and you have to take responsibility. And that teaches you, if anything, that teaches you circumspection and modesty. Whereas skepticism leads to a kind of complacent, I think a kind of a complacent irresponsibility, where it's actually a very conservative position. It says, well, why try to change things?
I'm going to have to hurry you, because alas, I cannot be complacent about the time. I can see them massing already.
To abandon the future means to relinquish the intellectual project of enlightenment. And there is no shortage of thinkers urging us to do just that. Its advocates on the right propose to rehabilitate ancient hierarchies mirroring an allegedly natural or divine order. But it also has, this anti-modernism also has, the critique of enlightenment also has many kind of, influential advocates on the left in the 20th century. Who think that the best we can hope for via radical scaling down of political and cognitive ambition is to achieve small-scale rectifications of universal injustice by establishing local, temporarily fleeting enclaves of civil justice. I mean, it's quite striking, so that, in the wake of the alleged, kind of collapse of the communist project, communism as a kind of, the Promethean ambitions of communism, there's been a kind of a remarkable scaling down of political ambition by those who espouse the ideals of justice and emancipation. The best you can hope for, apparently, is to try to kind of create little enclaves of, equality and justice. But the idea of remaking the world according to the ideal of equality or justice is routinely denounced as a dangerous totalitarian fantasy. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the kind of the narratives that draw a direct line from, the rationalist, post-Galilean rationalism and the kind of the advocacy of kind of the wholesale rationalization of nature to, the evils of totalitarianism. This is you've all heard this narrative many times before.
Yes, I just have a very quick, naive question for Ray Brassier. I'm here. You said at the end that nihilism is liberating, because you say if nihilism is true, then we have nothing to lose. And I agree that this conditional is true. However, I have a little problem. So I'm very sympathetic to nihilism. I think that it's almost certain that nihilism is true. However, I cannot infer that I have nothing to lose, because I still have the idea that maybe, there is a 5% or 1% chance that nihilism is false. And so when I try to know if I have something to lose or nothing to lose, I have to compute not only the fact that if nihilism is true, then I have nothing to lose, but I have also to take into account my degree of belief in nihilism. So I make the multiplication and I end up thinking, oh, but I still have something to lose, like a very small, very small thing, like, you understand what I mean? So I wanted to know, like, are you certain that nihilism is true? Or do you think there is a way how to say that, no, we really have nothing to lose, even though nihilism is not certainly true?
This is a yes or no question.
I don't believe it to be true, because I don't think it's something that is commensurate with belief. This is, Nietzsche already saw this. How can you believe that everything you believe is false? There is no such belief. You can't, this is the kind of the paradox. The only way in which you can overcome it then is through this, this affirmation where you give up believing, you give up the kind of, because you suspend the distinction between true and false belief. Okay, so you can't believe that nothing is true. This is something that's, it's not possible to believe this. This is why it's a mistake to formulate, the issue of nihilism in terms of believing or desiring. And this is where I think part of the critique, the rejection of folk psychology is useful. The point is, nihilism is not something to be believed in, nor is it something to be desired. It's something that requires a conceptual discipline, a discipline of conceptualization, which obliges you to rethink the basis of, the basis in terms of which you believe or desire anything.